Aldrin Sampear. Aldrin, thanks for joining us. It is quite a surprise, but she had been ill for some time, hadn't she?
Well, certainly this is also in the statement that has been released by the family just a short while ago, and I'm going to try and read through the statement. It is a bit lengthy. It goes as follows. It is with profound sadness that we inform the public that Mrs. Winnie Madikizela-Mandela passed away at the Netcare Milpark Hospital in Johannesburg in South Africa on Monday the 2nd of April. She died after a long illness for which she had been in and out of hospital since the start of the year. She succumbed peacefully in the early hours of Monday afternoon, surrounded by her family and loved ones. Mrs. Madikizela-Mandela was one of the greatest icons of the struggle against apartheid. She fought against the apartheid state and sacrificed her life for the freedom of this country. Her activism and resistance to apartheid landed her in jail on numerous occasions, eventually causing her banishment to a small town in Brantford in the Orange Free State. She kept the memory of her imprisoned husband Nelson Mandela alive during his year on Robben Island and helped give the struggle for justice in South Africa one of its most recognizable faces. She has dedicated most of her adult life to the cause of the people, and for this was known for far and wide, and she was known, of course, as the mother of the nation. The Mandela family are deeply grateful for the gift of her life, and even as our hearts break at her passing, we urge all those who loved her to celebrate this most remarkable woman. The family will release details of the memorial and the funeral service once these have been finalized. And wow, that is it.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, so that's the statement from the family expressing what had happened, and that she was surrounded by family as she passed away peacefully this afternoon in hospital. And this after, as you said, a long illness that she'd been receiving treatment for over a period of time. And this will be a sad time for South Africa, and for those outside of South Africa's borders who know the history of this country will know the role that she played and sacrifices that she made. You know, she was a young wife to an iconic man, and when he was sent to jail, she almost had to take over the family name and lead from the front, and she did that so bravely, and at times you know, was injured, hurt, imprisoned, tortured, but never lost the fight in the end,
and the courage up until the end. You know, this week, quite strangely, there's a documentary called Winnie by, I think it's a Dutch or a European producer that was played at Constitutional Hill last week in celebration of Human Rights Day, and this documentary details the life of Winnie Madikizela-Mandela, and a snippet or an excerpt of that documentary was sent to me, where she was responding to Desmond Tutu, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who was leading, of course, the TRC Commission, in which Archbishop Desmond Tutu then begged her to apologize for the role that she had played during that time, during the struggle. And the resentment was clear, and she said that, how dare he expects me to apologize, and I beg God to forgive me for failing to forgive him. And it speaks to the spirit of Winnie Madikizela-Mandela, because it's quite evident in that documentary that the documentary was shot probably about 2-3 years ago. She was quite old at the time already, but that resistance, the resilience that she has as a black woman, still stood clear. And unfortunately, just looking at that segment and driving on my way here to the office, I kept on thinking that, does this mean that Winnie Madikizela-Mandela dies resenting what she feels Archbishop Desmond Tutu has put her through? Because she said that in that instant that he was performing for the public. And you know that this has always been a vocal person within the ANC as well. She's never shied away from calling a spade a spade. And certainly quite a sad moment. And I guess that many people who will be heading to the Soweto home this afternoon and also this evening will be speaking about the life of Winnie Madikizela-Mandela, and of course the role that she played in this fight against apartheid.
Yeah, and many will have different memories of her. They had different experiences of her over the many, many years that she lived and contributed. And, you know, I saw that when she went on that birthday tour around the country, and it's almost now sounds prophetic that she went on this tour last year, sort of almost like a last chance to meet everybody, and the many people across political lines that actually showed up to wish her well and to wish her a happy birthday. So lots of memories, and I think that, you know, particularly during the struggles, people will see the history in their own ways, but I think nobody can doubt that she gave her life to South Africa at great sacrifice to herself.
Well, definitely, and I just quickly want to flip the script now that you've spoken about the birthday, because I covered the birthday cycle here in Johannesburg, but you were in Cape Town, and those pictures were doing the rounds of how beautiful this woman was. How could she be so beautiful at that age? And Peter, let me ask you this: how did you feel at that moment?
Do you know, she has just this aura around her when she walked through, and she says, Peter, I've been watching all of this and watching you on television, and she kept on saying that you know, we must come and have a proper interview, you and I, at some point. It never happened eventually, but I was just in awe watching that room in particular. You had members from, as I said, different political parties, and for that moment they forgot their differences and they were all united behind this beautiful woman. And
you had a picture that was circulating as well of Mama Winnie, and on the one hand you had Cyril Ramaphosa, and on the other hand you had Julius Malema as well.
And in fact, I think he said something like only she was more beautiful than his wife. So he joked a little bit about that. But she did touch the lives of many people, and no matter what people say, throughout, even post sort of the transition into democracy, she always felt that so much more work still needed to be done, and she always felt that her party, the ANC, still had so much work to do to alleviate poverty,
and was falling short of some of the promises that they've made. I remember asking her in one interview about it was the Fees Must Fall campaign that was taking place, and I was asking her about the Freedom Charter, that education shall be made free for all who live in South Africa, and she said that maybe at the time we were too ambitious as a liberation movement, because at the time, of course, we were not the governing party, but now we are the governing party, and only now do you realize how difficult it is. And this, of course, also speaks to what O.R. Tambo had said before, and this was reiterated by the former president, Jacob Zuma, during his speech at Nasrec, his farewell speech at Nasrec, that O.R. Tambo once told them that if you think that being a liberation movement is difficult, wait until you are the governing party, and then it becomes even more difficult. And of course, Mama Winnie has been quite vocal on some of the shortcomings of the party, and where the party has been failing. I remember quite vividly, actually, an interview that she did with Sophie Mukwena, our foreign editor, who will be joining us shortly. Where she spoke about the fallout within the ANC between former President Thabo Mbeki as well as former President Jacob Zuma. She said that she called them both and asked them, what's the matter? What is wrong? Do you understand that what you are causing now will forever damage the party? And when she was speaking to Thabo Mbeki, and Thabo Mbeki said that, Mama, you don't know that man. And Jacob Zuma said the same, that, Mama, you don't know that man. And looking at where the party finds itself, one cannot speak of Mama Winnie Madikizela-Mandela without speaking about the ANC itself and the role that she played within the ANC. And I guess these words will ring really loud in the ears of those two leaders, the former leaders of the ANC, that is Jacob Zuma as well as Thabo Mbeki, that why didn't we heed that call when she said that let's put our differences aside, because if we don't put our differences aside, we will forever divide the African National Congress?
She was iconic in the party itself. I mean, I think those people who understood her popularity, I mean, at one stage, she was #1 on the ANC list, you know, when they vote and they put forward their comrades on this list, and then they pick the NEC from there. She was the #1 person in the party. Such was her popularity. community. And so that anybody who would come into leadership could not lead without getting counsel or getting advice or including her in some way because of her stature and the contribution that she had made over time. But certainly I think even to this day we saw President Ramaphosa visiting her at her home in Soweto just the other day and having a cup of tea together.
Yeah, and one of those age-old promises that she has been saying, that Julius Malema, the EFF leader, I will work really hard to ensure that this man, Julius Malema, comes back to the ANC. And unfortunately, she dies today. And Julius Malema still remains the leader of the EFF. Of course, he's made it clear that he will never leave the EFF, that he remains the leader of the EFF. But certainly, she has played quite a pivotal role. And if you look at Mbuyiseni Ndlozi, for instance, when Mbuyiseni graduated, when he got his doctorate, and there was a celebration in the Vaal, she went all the way to the Vaal. And the viewers might not know this, that Mama Winnie does not really go to public events a lot, especially the last few months. But with Mbuyiseni Ndlozi, she felt that she should show up. And there was a whole celebration in the Vaal, people seeing Mama Winnie Madikizela-Mandela and celebrating Mama Winnie Madikizela-Mandela. But of course, you know, as we speak of Mama Winnie Madikizela-Mandela and that little snippet from that documentary that I tweeted the other day, some people will also remember that let's not forget that there are those who are not happy with the role that she may have played in the struggle against apartheid. Some may raise the names of various people who have died. They may raise the name of the Mandela Soccer Club at the time and say that as much as many will be celebrating her right now, we shouldn't forget that there are these things that may have happened. And probably to date we won't find, some of these families won't really find closure with regards to this, and it's pretty sad.
Yeah, it is. It will be a mixed legacy for some people, certainly. And I think, but when you judge her life in its entirety, one mustn't forget where it started. She started off as a social worker, and her job was to serve her community and serve the people, and there weren't many people getting into that line of work at that time. And so just from where she started, her whole orientation was towards her people, and always the poorest of the poor and the ones most in need. And I think that that was consistent over time. And yes, you know, I think if you've been jailed, if you've been tortured, if you've been banished, one can, I wouldn't say explain or start to sort of accept or whatever, but one can start to say, you know, abnormal things happen in abnormal times, and perhaps she may have found herself caught up in that kind of a situation at that time.
A very difficult life indeed that she's led. Up until this end, you speak about Mama Winnie, who's always been a champion for the poor. Up until this day, the last day, the 2nd of April 2018, her house is still in Soweto. When many of her comrades moved out of Soweto, she said that, quote unquote, I want to remain with my people. And I guess today her people will be crying out loud, and knowing that Mama Winnie Madikizela-Mandela has left the country, has left this nation, but has left the nation probably in a better space than we were before 1994. But as I said earlier on, some of the shortcomings from the governing party in terms of dealing with the issues of inequality, and especially where the girl child finds herself in South Africa. And this is something else that she's been championing as well. I remember speaking to one of the young girls. I don't know if you remember the story. It was the Pretoria High School story where the girl with the afro.
The hair,
yes, the one with the afro. And there was that whole debacle at the school. And I remember speaking to her and saying to this girl that I had spoken to Mama Winnie, and we would like to one day put together a discussion where we have young women together, women from different generations, and I would like to invite you to be one of the guests on that show. And when I had this discussion with Mama Winnie, and we spoke about having what she had called the true state of the nation, and this was one of the guests that I had suggested would be a brave little girl to bring in, you know, because she showed that power that Mama Winnie had back then. And she kept on calling me back over and over again. So when is this thing happening? When is this thing happening? And unfortunately, because Mama Winnie was so ill, the family said, unfortunately, we can't go through with this. And yeah, quite a sad day, hey?
Yeah, and you're so right when you talk about her not being afraid to speak her truth. One sees films and documentaries, and one of the things that one always sees, and what people sort of were attracted to her, was how she was able to stand up to white people at a time when it was unheard of that a black woman would stand up and
among men. There's one shot that I saw actually 2 years ago when I tried to put together an insert where it was the old police guard, and I think she had a duke on, and there were these black men who were being shoved into this armored vehicle, and she kept on shouting, "What do you think you're doing? What do you think you're doing?" And all these black men were just standing there, and she took a leadership role and said that my voice is going to be heard. I do not like what you're doing right now, because these are my people, and I will fight for my people.
And then, of course, you know, we talk about the sacrifices, about being jailed, being tortured, and being banished, but also that she was married to the struggle. And that she hardly saw her husband, she hardly spent any time as husband and wife with her husband. This is something that she accepted. She almost, I suppose in the end, ended up being a single mom, raising the kids all by herself. But such was the sacrifice that, you know, most people had their wives and their husbands, but there she was married to a man who was at the front of the struggle, and therefore had to sacrifice her own married life for the struggle.
And when her husband was arrested and her husband was sent to Robben Island, she didn't give up. And that's the thing, that it may have been that she met Nelson Mandela while she was still a social worker. And Nelson Mandela was a lawyer, becoming now a political activist, and she now got involved in the political struggle. But when her husband was arrested and sent to jail, she then took over that role, and she led the fight, even as a black woman, and saying that I, as a black woman, will not keep quiet in the face of this adversity, in the face of these attacks that are currently taking place in my country. This is the type of country that I envisage for South Africa, and I will ensure that this takes place. And it also speaks to the struggle of you know, I was actually on my way here as well. I was listening to Brenda Fassie's song, Good Black Woman, where she speaks about, I'm a good black woman. Policeman is treating me like a doggy, and there are these shots of black women in the struggle. One shot of a black woman standing next to a public transport seat, and that seat is written "Net for Blankes," just for whites. And this woman could not sit on this chair. And that's the struggle that Mama Winnie Madikizela-Mandela had to face at the time. But even then, she didn't give up. And you speak about the attacks. You speak about the house being invaded in Orlando West, the one that's now being turned into a museum in Orlando West. And the pain that she endured, but never, ever did she give up.
Yeah, and it was difficult. I mean, I don't think people understand what it's like to be in solitary confinement and being tortured and beaten, separated from your children, and what that can do to you psychologically. But somehow she got through. I mean, some of the darkest moments of apartheid, she felt physically, emotionally, on her person, on her body. So, yeah, you know, she has lived a remarkable life, and many people will, I think, when they're reflecting and telling her story, will, by and large, I think overall, will say it was a remarkable life lived.
And indeed, a remarkable life led. Remember the movie Winnie, the one where Jennifer Hudson stars in? And how Mum Winnie was totally against that movie and said that this movie does not have my blessing whatsoever. And again, it speaks to that woman that, you know what, if I don't agree with you, I will tell you that I do not agree with you.
Yeah. All right. So for the next, I'm sure, hours, we're going to be trying getting some reaction from people that knew her throughout her life. We hope to get people like EFF leader Julius Malema. But before that, let's take a look back at her remarkable life that's being celebrated on her 81st birthday.
A young Winnie Madikizela-Mandela. Defiant, fearless, stylish and beautiful, then as she is today. That's how the world was introduced to her, as the wife of the country's best-known activist and soon-to-be political prisoner. And so began the fascination with Winnie Madikizela-Mandela, as photographers scrambled to capture her regal beauty. Since then, she's become one of the country's most photographed people. Some of the most iconic of these works is by a renowned photographer who captured her image during her most trying times in the 70s and 80s.
She is a beautiful lady here. The family, the Madikizela family, are beautiful. And she doesn't use any makeups. It's natural beauty. Following
the lengthy imprisonment of Mandela and his comrades, their spouses were thrust into unsolicited leadership roles. While some were reluctant, others, such as Madikizela-Mandela, accepted the thorny crown.
Tell me what happened, how you came to shoot her son. This is the mother.
Like Cleopatra, Winnie Madikizela-Mandela has been a timeless beauty. She was attractive in her late adolescent, early adult period, which made Nelson Mandela swoon over her. And she retains that beauty. She retains that largely because despite all that has happened to her, she's been able to acknowledge who she sees in the mirror and has attempted to make sure that that image remains vibrant and attractive.
The woman that South Africa grew fond of was a beautiful young woman from whom her husband drew strength. In a prison letter written to her, Nelson Mandela marvels at his wife's beauty in a family portrait she sends him.
To me, the portrait aroused mixed feelings. You look somewhat sad, absent-minded, and unwell, but lovely all the same. The big one is a magnificent study that depicts all I know in you. The devastating beauty and charm which 10 stormy years of married life have not chilled. I suspect that you intended the picture to convey a special message that no words could ever express. Rest assured, I have caught it.
In addition to photographers, musicians also shared their fascination with the struggle icon. Most notably, late jazz singer Soweto.We Benjamin, who wrote a song in praise of her beauty and strength.
In the Cape Times today, Dougie Oates quotes a song penned by Soweto.We Benjamin called Winnie Mandela, Beloved Heroine. I'm going to begin by reading a bit from the song. Winnie Mandela, beautiful, brave, and brave is she, a symbol of courage to all who strive to be free. We love her grace and dignity. Beloved heroine is she. She leads the way, never showing doubts and fears. Soft, gentle eyes, reflecting all those unshared tears.
This was the occasion of her 80th birthday celebration. After a long absence from the public's eye.
Mama, we know your life so well. It's been made into films, it's been made into documentaries, and we know when you met Tatwe to Madiba, how beautiful you were, and you swept him off his feet. You were a diamond that was born to shine, and you did shine, but also to last and never to break. And like a diamond, Mama Winnie displays and conveys complexity. She displays strength, and she displays beauty.
Madikizela-Mandela has not only been a timeless beauty, she's also a style icon in her own right. Her long-time designer, who's been dressing her since the 80s, can attest to this.
She's a doll in terms of how she dresses up. Even if ever you have done a mistake, you will never see on her body, because in the garment that you have designed, because she's got that charisma of carrying that look, that character of your garment that you wanted to put at the time. And also, she has got her own art in terms of enhancing whatever that you are doing. For an example, I'll use a pure, simplest thing as a duke. You will give her a duke, but the way she will turn around that turban and that duke in terms of making the point that she makes that kind of a statement.
We were the cannon fodder, we were the foot soldiers, and we were exposed to the viciousness of apartheid.
Director of this award-winning documentary talks about her beauty as not just being physical, but something that radiates from within.
Even though she understands with her acute intelligence all those things that have gone wrong and gone awry and all the contradictions that keep being played out in this country, her heart and soul, her intelligence, her commitment is to bettering the lives of South Africans. So when you speak of her beauty and her charisma and that incredible shine and power that comes through, I think it comes from her human love and her commitment to principles that are, in my view, of primordial importance everywhere in the world.
Madikizela-Mandela herself has always been modest about her appearance, downplaying all the attention she sometimes gets. Modesty notwithstanding, Winnie Madikizela-Mandela remains an eternal beauty, a characteristic that draws from her strength and fearlessness, one that's beautiful in its own right.
So that was a